now move to the next urgent question. Urgent question, Danny Kruger.
Very much indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker. Will the Minister make a statement to the House about the ongoing negotiations on the World Health Organization Pandemic Agreement and the amendments to the international health regulations ahead of any votes at the World Health Assembly, which starts next week?
Well, thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I congratulate my honourable friend, the member for Devizes, for securing this urgent question, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to update the House. I want to start by making three promises. First, the Government will only accept the accord and targeted amendments to the international health regulations if they are firmly in the United Kingdom's national interest, and no text has yet been agreed. We will only accept the accord and amendments by the World Health Assembly and adopt them if they are firmly in the UK's national interest to do so. Secondly, this Government will only sign up to measures that respect our national sovereignty. And third, under no circumstances will we allow the WHO to have the power to mandate lockdowns. This would be unthinkable and has never been proposed. Protecting our sovereignty is a British red line. Madam Deputy Speaker, let me now dispel three myths about the negotiations. First, the myth that the negotiations are being led by the WHO. They are not being led by the WHO, they are entirely led by member states. Second, the idea that we would give away a fifth of our vaccines in the next pandemic. This is simply not true. And of course, Madam Deputy Speaker, we are a generous country. Companies may make their own choices to donate vaccines, but this would be and should be entirely their decision. Countries are discussing a voluntary mechanism for UK businesses to sign up to if they wish to share vaccines in return for information they may need to develop their products. And a third point is about transparency. This is a point I take extremely seriously as one who campaigned so hard for this Parliament's sovereignty. Whilst it is not common practice for the Government to give an update on live negotiations, I met with some interested parliamentarians last week to discuss their concerns with these negotiations. I also had the pleasure of leading a Westminster Hall debate on these negotiations in December, attended by my honourable friend and many others, and I will continue to meet with him and other concerned parliamentarians as we act in the national interest. Madam Deputy Speaker, effective agreements can help us to deliver smarter surveillance, swifter pathogen and data sharing, faster development of pandemic vaccines, tests and treatments, which would save lives and protect people both in the UK and around the world.
Danny Kruger.
Deputy Speaker, can I say how much I appreciate the commitments that the Minister has just made, and I want to acknowledge the good work that he has been doing in government and indeed his predecessors ahead of the World Health Assembly that meets next week, and I'm very pleased to hear the commitments that he's just made. My concern, Madam Deputy Speaker, is not with the government's position, but with the WHO itself, and I appreciate his point that it's member states leading these proposals. That's worrying in itself. But we know from the drafts that have been submitted in recent months what the real agenda of the WHO is. They want to have binding powers over national governments to introduce all sorts of restrictive measures on our citizens. They want to be able to direct the health budgets of member states. They want to introduce global digital health passports and other measures. And this is the organisation that aspires, in the words that are still in the draft treaty that we have, to be, and I quote, the directing and coordinating authority on international health work, including pandemic prevention and response. And I appreciate no text has yet been agreed, which is why it's important that we have this debate. But the proposals in the latest draft that was published last month are concerning enough, and they require national governments to agree to a whole series of commitments which will be binding under international law if the UK signs up to them. Surveillance of the health of the population, commitments on funding, both in the UK and abroad, the emergency authorisation of new vaccines, speeded up authorisation processes, to give some vaccines to the WHO to distribute, potentially the authorisation of national governments to introduce compulsory vaccination of travellers, and a very wide discretion given to the Director General of the WHO to act on his own initiative. Madam Deputy Speaker, the Government still has the opportunity to oppose the treaty and the regulations as they're currently drafted. We appreciate we'll wait to see the final text in the coming days. But can I ask the Minister to clarify very explicitly from the dispatch box what the government's red lines are? I heard what he said. Could he go a little further in the detail on what he means? Secondly, will the government oppose any text that binds this or a future government in how it responds to health threats? And finally, crucially, will the government comply with CRAG, the requirement to put the treaties to a ratification vote in Parliament?
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I thank my honourable friend for the constructive way that he and other parliamentarians have engaged with this subject matter and the challenges it presents. As I said in my opening remarks, no text has yet been agreed. I set out some of our negotiating red lines. I'm happy to confirm from the dispatch box that the current text is not acceptable to us, and therefore, unless the current text is changed and refined, we will not be signing up. My honourable friend asks about how the treaty will be ratified if we reached a position which the UK government could agree to. The UK treaty making process means the accord is, of course, negotiated and agreed by the government. Parliament, as he will know, plays an important part in scrutinising treaties under the CRAG process and determining how international obligations should be reflected domestically. But it's important to remember that because the exact form of the accord has not yet been agreed, the parliamentary and the adoption process will depend on which article of the WHO Constitution the accord is adopted under.
Shadow Minister Andrew Gwynne.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. This country has a role and a responsibility in protecting global health. It is a part we played during the COVID pandemic. British science stood tall on the world stage, and our country donated 84 million vaccine doses to help vaccinate the world. We learnt from the Omicron variant that when it comes to global pandemics, none of us are safe until all of us are safe. We also benefited from researchers around the world sharing early knowledge about COVID-19, collaboration which was crucial in protecting British people and ultimately in developing the vaccine. But there is a clear principle when it comes to national security. It is the same we follow when we get onto an aeroplane. You apply your own oxygen mask before you help others apply theirs. The Minister says the draft text is not acceptable, and I want to be clear that a Labour government will not sign anything which would leave our population unprotected in the face of a novel disease. We are debating a treaty that is still being negotiated by member states, and none of us know the final content or wording. So can the Minister reconfirm to the House that the government will not sign up to anything that would compromise the UK's ability to take domestic decisions on national public health measures? Has he consulted the UK's life sciences sector ahead of these negotiations? And what conversations has he had with the international counterparts and our allies about this treaty and our joint pandemic preparedness? As we work with colleagues around the world to bolster our efforts to tackle novel threats, it's vital that we get the balance right between sharing knowledge and protecting intellectual property. So can he set out his approach to any requirements for time-limited waivers on intellectual property related to vaccines and therapeutics in the event of a global disease outbreak? And finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, it's vital that we are led by science and evidence when tackling the threat of global disease epidemics. So can the Minister tell us what his department is doing to tackle misinformation about pandemics and vaccines?
Well, can I thank the Shadow Minister for his remarks? I would confirm that we are firmly fighting in Britain's interests an accord and strengthened international health regulations that fully respect national sovereignty, can save lives and protect people both in the UK and around the world. But they have to fully respect national sovereignty, and that is what is at the heart of our negotiating position. It therefore will always be up to nation states to decide what is implemented within their own borders. Just to answer a couple of his specific points, yes, I have met with representatives of the life sciences sector about this and some of the specific proposals. The last meeting I had with them was last week. And in terms of dealing with international counterparts, I will be attending the World Health Assembly in Geneva myself. The final point I would make, Madam Deputy Speaker, is just to say he is right to pay tribute to what this country did globally during the pandemic. Of course, in 2021, we used the G7 presidency to mobilise G7 countries to donate surplus vaccines, and by May 2022, the G7 had donated 1.18 billion doses against a target of 870 million. The UK alone donated over 80 million doses, benefiting 40 countries.
Sir Liam Fox.
We all want better coordination in the face of any future pandemic risk, but it's also clear that the WHO wants supranational powers. So will my right honourable friend guarantee that the UK government will not accept any obligation that requires the UK to legislate to implement any element of the WHO treaty into UK law?
I thank my right honourable friend for his question. At the moment, we do not envisage any proposal from this requiring changes to domestic law. I think it is highly unlikely that any proposals will come forward in that shape or form. I have some sympathy for what he says. I think most organisations, such as the WHO, will always look to expand their remit and look to gain more power in order to coordinate things. But these negotiations are being led by member states, and sovereignty is a key part of the negotiating position of the vast majority of countries in these negotiations. It is not just the UK arguing for this. Countries around the world are arguing that this needs to be a high-level agreement which helps coordination, helps information sharing, but doesn't in any way tie people's hands in how we respond domestically to any future pandemic.
SNP spokesperson Kirsty Black.
Thank you. We cannot have a repeat of what WHO called the catastrophic failure of the international community to ensure that COVID-19 was fought everywhere with all of our abilities. And it will require give and take, with give on the part of OECD countries commensurate with our comparative economic strength and population health. Though there may be disagreements across the House, I do think that we all agree that pandemics should be fought on an international basis and that other countries should be assisted where we have got the strength and the ability to do that. Despite that level of agreement, there's been a persistent barrage of mis and disinformation, not least hitting our own inboxes. As negotiations proceed on this, what steps will the UK government be taking to ensure that the public understand what the treaty will do and to tackle and robustly rebut the mis and disinformation that's being spread, particularly about this treaty?
Well, I think the SNP spokesman makes a very important point. There has been lots of misinformation about this, but part of this, part of the disinformation has come about because of actually some of the transparency over all the amendments being published, for example, on the WHO website and various other information, has allowed people to think that that's suddenly a kind of text that would be agreed. We need to be very clear that no text whatsoever has been agreed. The negotiations continue. The text, I think most people both in this House and hopefully outside, would recognise that the text now, the working draft text, most recently published on the WHO website, is a significant improvement on the initial drafts. I think we all share an ambition that we can get to a text that can be agreed, but it has to put national interest and national sovereignty at its heart. And therefore, I will do the best I can to ensure that the House is kept updated as further iterations of the text emerge. The latest version was published on the WHO website on the 17th of April.
Will Quince.
Deputy Speaker, and as the Health Minister who represented the UK at last year's World Health Assembly and the United Nations General Assembly, I stood at that dispatch box and confirmed that we would not sign up to any IHR amendment or any other instrument that would compromise the UK's ability to make domestic decisions on national measures concerning public health. So can my right honourable friend confirm that His Majesty's Government's position on this remains unchanged and resolute?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, I pay tribute to my predecessor for the work he did, and let me reiterate the point. The UK Government has been clear that it will not sign up to any accord or any changes in the international health regulations that would cede sovereignty to the WHO in making domestic decisions on national measures concerning public health, such as domestic immunisation programmes or lockdowns.
Ian Paisley.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Does the Minister confirm that WHO was slow to react to SARS, was slow to react to the Ebola crisis, was slow to react to COVID-19, and steadfastly refused to criticise in any way the Chinese regime throughout that period. That being the case, will he confirm again from the dispatch box that no outside organisation will ever be able to take any decision to do with the internal health and well-being of citizens of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland?
Minister.
Well, one of the reasons why the WHO in the past has been slow to respond, and probably in the future may be slow to respond, is, of course, it is a member state-led organisation governed by the World Health Assembly, which comprises 194 member states operating under the WHO Constitution. Any decisions made by the WHO have to be agreed by all member states, including the UK, beforehand. So that does somewhat tie its hands. However, we believe, and many other like-minded countries believe, that all these decisions are best made domestically, depending on the domestic situation. The domestic situation in the UK will be radically different in any future pandemic from the domestic situation in any other country around the world. We have to work collaboratively on things like sharing of data, but there are many other things where it is right, 100% right, that the decisions are made in this country by our government.
Sir Simon Clarke.
Deputy Speaker, and I welcome confirmation from my right honourable friend that the government does not consider the current drafting of the proposed treaty to be acceptable. That's good to have on the record. On a principles-led basis, I do not believe this is in the UK's national interest to accede to. I think anything which compromises our ability to make sovereign choices is profoundly unwelcome. Can the Minister commit that, regardless of the technicalities of the precise form that any treaty may finally emerge in, that if the UK does decide to accede to this treaty, that we will have a vote in this House? Because I really do think we can see from the certainly on this side of the House, and obviously there's no presence on the other side. On this side of the House, there are real reservations about what this would mean in practice for our ability to make the right choices for our people.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate the point made by my right honourable friend. As I said in answer to an earlier question, Madam Deputy Speaker, because we do not know the exact form the accord will take at the moment, it is very hard to say what the parliamentary procedure will be that flows out of it, but I certainly will provide any opportunity I can in order to facilitate as much debate as possible. However, I would just say on, my right honourable friend and I agree on many things. On this, I would just say, having really looked at the detail of this, I genuinely believe agreeing a meaningful accord is firmly in the UK's national interest. This accord is an opportunity to enhance UK health, economic and national security. An effective accord will improve disease surveillance and prevention by making sure that globally we have the information we need to raise the alarm early. It strengthens research and development to help stop pandemics in their tracks and enable a better coordinated global response to pandemics, including getting those vaccines, treatments and tests rapidly to where they're needed most. So I genuinely believe there is a window of opportunity here to get an accord which is in the UK's national interest. We are not there yet. As I say, the current text is unacceptable, but we will keep negotiating because I believe there is a window of opportunity here to agree something that genuinely is in the UK national interest. But if we can't agree that, we won't sign it.
Jonathan Edwards.
Madam Deputy Speaker, public health is devolved in the context of Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland. So therefore, how often does the Minister engage with the devolved governments on the UK government's negotiating positions in relation to these matters?
Well, as he will know, that international treaties are matters for the UK government, and therefore this is being negotiated by the UK government. However, I'm happy to reassure him that when I was appointed as a minister back in the Department of Health back in November, I do not see myself as purely the Minister for Health in England. So I visited Wales very early on to meet with some of the outstanding life sciences companies developing products in Wales that will benefit patients across the entire UK. I visited Northern Ireland to visit some of the great universities and outstanding businesses they have in Northern Ireland. I also visited Scotland to both meet with Michael Matheson, the then Scottish Health Secretary, but also meet with Edinburgh University and various other outstanding universities and businesses up in Scotland. So I see very much the Union and the impacts everything has on the whole United Kingdom as being central to these negotiations.
Sir William Cash.
May I congratulate my honourable friend, the member for Devizes, on this urgent question, and also to congratulate those on this side of the House, noticing that there aren't any on the other side of the House apart from the Minister, the Shadow Minister, to actually address the question of whether or not any meaningful accord is possible. Supranationality has to be out, as I've said on countless occasions, when it is not in our national interest. Sovereignty has to prevail, and I would remind the Minister, with respect to the regulation brought in by the EU at the time of COVID, which had to be abandoned because we put our foot down and said we were not going to accept their restrictions on our ability to produce the vaccine. That is a good example. Will you please follow it and make sure we don't have any weasel words?
Well, I thank my right honourable friend for his point. He makes a passionate and a pertinent point. Throughout the negotiations, the UK has been and will continue to be clear that we will not sign up to any accord that fails to meet our global health and UK health security priorities. Likewise, the UK would not sign up to an accord which will cede sovereignty to the WHO, making domestic decisions on national measures concerning public health, for example, immunisation programmes or lockdowns. Any changes to or new domestic legislation necessary or appropriate would of course be made through the usual parliamentary process, but as I say, because we do not know the exact details of the accord yet, I cannot be any clearer on how exactly Parliament will get to scrutinise the accord if we get to a agreement.
Sammy Wilson.
The treaty is not just about data sharing and about information gathering. It's about setting up a system of pandemic management which will be under the leadership of WHO, which has got a poor history of management and decision making. Can the Minister give us an assurance that he will not be accepting any surrender of UK powers to an international body which can interfere with decisions which will affect the lives of ordinary people here in the United Kingdom? And will he also assure us, I've listened to his response about devolved governments, it seems that there's not much discussion with devolved administrations. He's not even going to guarantee a vote in this House on such an important issue. Can he guarantee that we're not going to hand over democratic control to a non-democratic body and do it undemocratically?
Well, we will not be handing over any kind of control over domestically what we do. National sovereignty is a clear red line, as I made clear in my opening remarks. I think it is important to recognise, there are challenges in these things. All these things are being negotiated within the existing international health regulations. The DG of the World Health Organization already has the ability to things like declare a public health event of international concern and issue temporary recommendations that provide non-binding guidance to member states. But we believe in future, again, we need to stay in this situation where the World Health Organization has an important convening role internationally to discuss issues, but the domestic response to any future pandemic is for domestic governments to make, and therefore anything that impinges on UK national sovereignty will be unacceptable to ourselves.
Suella Braverman.
Deputy Speaker, and I want to put on record my thanks to the Minister for his hard work and indeed his time last week when he met with colleagues and myself to discuss the terms of this treaty. And he will know that I am profoundly sceptical of the World Health Organization's ability to manage a global pandemic in light of serious errors of judgment, poor leadership, and I'm afraid well-chronicled conflicts of interest which have subsequently emerged. Of course, we can help poorer countries. Of course, we can collaborate with other nations. But under no circumstances must we surrender our sovereignty or sign up to a lockdown charter. And I hear what the Minister says about the text currently on the table and that it doesn't bind our hand. But he will know, many of us will know, that in the heat of an emergency, in the real time of a pandemic, there will be irresistible pressure that mounts on a government to make decisions which may well, and as we found, will turn out to be wholly harmful and wrong ones for the good of the country. That's why, Madam Deputy Speaker, will the Minister agree that fundamentally, and to coin a phrase, no pandemic treaty is better than a bad pandemic treaty?
I 100% agree with my right honourable friend that no treaty is better than a bad treaty. However, if we scroll back to why this process was originally started, it was the former member for Uxbridge who called for this accord, and internationally led calls for this accord. And the reason behind that is we believe that commitments on stronger international collaboration and cooperation on global health are crucial to secure the UK's health and economic security. But domestic decisions still have to be left to sovereign nation states to take the right decisions for their country. So I think there is a lot of agreement between my right honourable friend and I, and can I thank her once again for engaging in such a constructive fashion and meeting with me to express her and other parliamentarians' views.
Stephen Farry.
Thank you. I concur that any new treaty has to be got right for the UK. But can I ask the Minister to reflect on the very meaning of the word pandemic, which suggests an element of international spread of disease or indeed a global problem? And for the sake of balance in terms of this session, can he really emphasise the importance of the UK working in collaboration on an intergovernmental basis with others in terms of how they react to these issues around matters such as potentially restrictions on travel and also global vaccine equity, because we have to ensure that as long as the world is safe, then the UK is also safe.
Well, the honourable gentleman makes an important point. I talked about before the leadership showed by the UK government when we had the G7 presidency back in 2021. The UK, in addition to supplying vaccines around the world, really, as of 2022, an estimated 2.7 million COVID-19 deaths have been prevented due to the COVAX-supported vaccination programmes in different countries around the world. So, we do need to work internationally. Sharing data can head off future pandemics, and therefore, we need to ensure that a good accord would deliver that data sharing, that collaboration, which can prevent future health emergencies, not tie the hands of domestic governments to respond appropriately to such emergencies.
Sir Mike Penning.
Madam Deputy Speaker, can I say on behalf of the volunteers and the vaccination centres around the country during the pandemic, which I had the honour of working in as well, the key to this is that the vaccines are available to us before we give them to anybody else in the world. So I think I'm listening to what the Minister is saying, collaboration does not mean compulsion in any way or form.
Well, as a volunteer vaccinator during the pandemic, can I say I 100% agree. We have to look after our own people, our own citizens, the people that we elected to represent first. And, we are investing heavily in the British life sciences sector to ensure that our life sciences sector are even more prepared for any future pandemic, and we are ensuring that we have more domestic manufacturing capabilities so we can have more vaccines ourselves without being reliant on other countries. However, there is still a point where if a new pandemic was emerging in a part of the world which was far from our shores, in order to ensure that the data, particularly the pathogen data, was shared early, and therefore those world-beating British companies, whether they be the tiny life sciences startups or the big pharmaceutical companies, can take that data, use that data to produce the drugs that could hopefully ensure that that doesn't become a full-blown pandemic and doesn't cost as many lives as the last pandemic did.
Andrew Bridgen.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'd like to start by congratulating the Honourable Member for Devizes for his timing of this important, urgent question. Madam Deputy Speaker, repeatedly during this questioning session, the Minister has stated that we don't really know what shape the pandemic agreement or the accord or treaty is going to take. Madam Deputy Speaker, under Article 55, paragraph 2 of the WHO, the World Health Organisation's own charter, it states that all member states must have a full draft of the amendments to treaties to be voted on 4 months in advance. Given that despite the fact that the WHO are breaking their own rules, they are insisting on moving forward with the votes in Geneva on the 27th of May on the pandemic treaty and the amendments to the international health regulations. Will the Minister join me and many others in calling for a deferment of those votes until this House and others around the world have had a chance to examine these very important details?
No, because there is no text that has been agreed. This has been evolving. We have seen new amendments, we have seen new revised drafts, and the latest negotiations on the Accord took place on the 29th of April to the 10th of May. The next round of negotiations will take place 16th to the 17th of May, and they will continue on the 20th to the 25th of May, leading to the World Health Assembly meeting taking place in Geneva on the 27th of May to the 1st of June. There has been a lot of progress in getting a text which is more agreeable to a majority of member states, but we are still some way off getting to a text that can be agreed. That we are hoping for significant changes in the coming days, and I will do my best to keep the House updated.
Who's gone? Richard Drex.
Can I firmly tell the Minister that the road to hell is paved with good intentions? I don't trust bureaucracies, and I certainly don't trust this one. And judging by the way it behaved last time, and its instinct to lock us all down, and the huge damage we've seen to every part of our national infrastructure, I suspect the tendency will be to do the same again, to our detriment. Can you reassure me, as he's done already, but I want to hear it again, that he will in effect not sign anything? Because we don't need to sign something to collaborate with other nations for the good of them, as well as our own country.
I will happily reassure my honourable friend that national sovereignty comes first. We will continue to do everything we can to ensure that we get to an accord that is agreeable. But if this is an accord that undermines our sovereignty and our ability to act domestically in any way, we will simply be not signing it.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And having been contacted by a large volume of constituents who have voiced grave concern over the powers and rights requested and required by this unelected body, and whilst we may be supportive of some of the work carried out to help developing countries, the sovereignty of this nation is not something that can or will be signed away, and that our participation in the WHO should not come with a prerequisite to sign up to these demands. And further, if this is the case, then we will no longer be a participating member of the WHO.
Just to reiterate my point, the Government will only accept the Accord and targeted amendments to the international health regulations if they are firmly in the United Kingdom's national interest, and no text has yet been agreed. We continue the negotiations. I will try to do my best to keep honourable and right honourable members as informed as I can without providing a running commentary on the negotiations, but I genuinely believe that we can get to a position where there is an accord which is in the UK national interest.
Sir John Redwood.
So will he then publish the amendments the government is seeking? He says rightly he needs a very different treaty from the one we see on offer. He needs to persuade other nations. He should be making a public case, and then we wouldn't be so suspicious. There must be no new legal requirement imposed on the United Kingdom.
Madam Deputy Speaker, we do not envisage any new legal requirements being imposed on the United Kingdom, and any changes to our domestic ability to react to any future pandemic would be unacceptable and would cross one of our red lines. I think in the debate today and in the Westminster Hall debate that I know my right honourable friend also participated in, I was as clear as I could be on the UK's red lines in these negotiations. We have been very upfront, both with Parliament but also with our international partners, that the current text is not agreeable to us, and we are seeking significant changes if we are going to reach an accord that is going to be signed by the United Kingdom.
Mark Francois.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I too participated in that Westminster Hall debate. But for the record, this UQ has been running for well over half an hour, and not a single Labour backbencher has been even present in the chamber, let alone asked a question, even though we're discussing, in effect, the medical sovereignty of the United Kingdom. as there are a lot of Conservatives here, can I say to the Minister, we'd probably be better not to sign this at all, not least because many of us have concerns about malign influences on the WHO. But if we were to sign it, and I'd rather we didn't, can the Minister give us a cast-iron commitment we will have a vote, dare I say a meaningful vote on it, in this House of Commons before it comes into force?
Well, I thank my right honourable friend for his powerful point. I think it once again underlines that you can only trust the Conservatives with the NHS. Turning to the point, unfortunately, Madam Deputy Speaker, as I have said in answer to a couple of questions, because we do not know the form that this treaty is going to take, it is very hard to set out, therefore, the parliamentary process for adoption. We do know, obviously, there are different parliamentary processes depending on the form that this takes. I will do everything I can, and make that personal commitment to him, to do everything I can to engage this House. But I cannot, at this point, specify the procedure it would follow in this House, the processes it would follow, or whether there would be a vote.
Philip Hollowbone.
My honourable friend, the member for Devizes, for securing this urgent question, and thank Mr Speaker for granting it. The World Health Organization is a failing, mega expensive, unelected, unaccountable, supranational body which is increasingly under the influence of the global elite, is funded from a small number of non-state actors, and China is a malign influence over the WHO. Surely the initial drafts of this treaty must have set alarm bells ringing even in Whitehall at this attempted power grab. Can I urge the Minister not to sign this treaty, because we can have enhanced cooperation and collaboration to counter future pandemics without legally binding commitments?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, I would argue that WHO membership gives the UK a seat at the table in global health discussions, allowing us to amplify UK priorities at an international level. There are 194 member states. If we can agree a high-level treaty that does not impinge upon our national sovereignty via the negotiation between the 194 member states, I think that is a good outcome and a better outcome than trying to individually negotiate agreements with all 194 member states.
Tom Hunt.
Mr Speaker, I'd say to my right honourable friend, the member for Reading and Wickford, it's hardly surprising that a debate that largely hinges upon national sovereignty is of very little interest to the Labour Party opposite. The national principle, national democracy, is something incredibly important to me, many of my constituents and other people in this place. I'm absolutely pro-collaboration, but it needs to be through the national principle, and nothing must be done that undermines the national principle. But this debate keeps on returning. We thought it would end at Brexit, it didn't. It's now going to the ECHR, and it's now going with the WHO. Will the Minister confirm to me that, yes, we are pro-collaboration and cooperation, but when it comes to national sovereignty, we should always oppose supranationalism and the worst excesses of globalism?
The UK Government has been clear that we will not sign up to an accord or any international health regulation amendments that would cede sovereignty to the WHO in making domestic decisions on national measures concerning public health, such as domestic immunisation programmes or lockdowns. Respecting national sovereignty rights is a distinct principle in the current draft of the Accord, and respecting the sovereign rights of states to adopt, legislate and implement legislation within their jurisdiction remains a distinct principle in the drafted amendments to the IHR. I genuinely believe, Madam Deputy Speaker, that there is a window of opportunity to negotiate an accord here which is in the UK national interest as well as in the global interest.
Well, I thank the Minister for answering the urgent question.